Just that's. Sorry. أنا كذي وشفت لما ياسين.
كوتشي أو ياسين.
كونه كذي.
كوتشي.
You can do it. You have already automatically.
Okay, I'll start.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم 2 فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين. إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون. يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون. وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون. وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون. وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون. والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون. وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومطاعا إلى حين. وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون. وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين. وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين. ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين. ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون. ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون. قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون. إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون. فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون. إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون. هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون. لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون. سلام قولا من رب رحيم. وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون. ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم. ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون. هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويهق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وظللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون اللهم صل على محمد وآل سورة الفاتحة
बुक है बुक दे बुक से पढ़ ले हाँ जी ठीक है ठीक है أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخذلها كل شيء وذللها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أزاله كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك واستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزيني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خادم متذلل خاشي أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني باسمك راضيا قانيا وفي جميع الأحوال متوازيا اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وأدم فيما عندك رغبته اللهم أدم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لكبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي اللهم مولاي كم من كبير سترته وكم من فاد من البلاء قلته وكم من إسار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لسته ولله نشرته اللهم عظم بلائي وافرت بي سوء حالي وكثرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد عملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفزعني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تواجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملت في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت في هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء وتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك ولك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك
ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي في قضاؤك والزمني حكمك وبلاؤك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شد وساكي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عزمي ومن بدا خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالح برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضيا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته وتبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة ولا ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادها ولا قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة ولا ضمائر هوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشية ولا جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائية وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها ألا أن ذلك بلاء مكروه قليل مكسوه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته وكيف احتمال لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي وكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما من هذا جوابك لأليم العذاب وشدتي أم لطول البلاء ومدتي لئن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأزجن إليك بين أهلها زجيج العاملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يزج إليك زجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك أم كيف تؤلم النار وهو يعمل وفضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يهلكه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه أم كيف يستعمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت بالموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين يقطع لولا ما قمت به من تعذيب جاهديك وقضيت به من إخلاص معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت تملاها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجلك ثناؤك قلت مبتديا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما ومن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي هتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت علي أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيل أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جواره وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر هزي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رزقي يا من بيدي ناصيتي يا عليما بذري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي या रब्बी या रब्बी या रब अस्अलुका बिहक्किका व कुद्सिका व अज़मी सिफ़ातिका व अस्माइक अन तजअल औक़ाती मिनल लैलि वन नहार बिज़िक्रिका मअमूरा व बिख़िदमतिका मौसूला व अमाली इंदका मक़बूला हत्ता तकून अमाली व औरादी कुल्लहा विर्दन वाहिदा व हाली फ़ी ख़िदमतिका सरमदा या सय्यदी या मन अलैहि मुअव्वली या मन इलैहि शक़ौत अहवाली या रब्बी या रब्बी या रब कव्वी अला ख़िदमतिका जवारिही वाहिद अलल अज़ीमति जवानिही वअबलियल जिद्द फ़ी ख़श्यतिक वद्दवाम फ़िल इत्तिसाल बिख़िदमतिक हत्ता असरा इलैका फ़ी मयादीन साबिकीन वअसरी इलैका फ़िल बारिज़ीन वश्ताक़ इला क़ुर्बिका फ़िल मुश्ताक़ीन वअदनुवा मिनका दुनुवल मुख़लिसीन वख़ाफ़का मख़ाफ़तल मूक़िनीन वइस्तमिया फ़ी जवारिका मल मुअमिनीन अल्लाहुम्मा वमन अरादनी बिसूइन फ़ारिद वमन कादनी फ़क़िद वजअलनी मिन अहसनी अबीदिका नसीबन इंदक वअक़रबिहिम मंज़िलतम मिनक वख़स्सिम ज़ुल्फ़तन लदैक फ़इन्नहु ला युनालु ज़ालिका इल्ला बिफ़ज़लिक वजुदली बिजूदिक वातिफ़ अलैया बिमजदिक वहफ़ज़नी बिरहमतिक वजअल लिसानी बिज़िक्रिका लहिजा वक़ल्बी बिहुब्बिका मुतय्यमा वमुन अलैया बिहुस्नि इजाबतिक वकिलनी असरती वफ़िर ज़ल्लती वइन्नका क़ज़ैत अला इबादिका बिइबादतिक वअमरतहुम बिदुआइक वज़मिनत लहुमुल इजाबा वइलैक या रब्बी नसबतु वजही वइलैक या रब्बी मददतु यदी वबिइज़्ज़तिका अस्तजिब ली दुआई वबल्लिगनी मुनाया वला तक़ता मिन फ़ज़लिका रजाई वक़्फ़िनी शर्रल जिन्नि वल इंसि मिन अअदाई या सरियर रिज़ा या सरियर रिज़ा इफ़िल लिमन ला यमलिकु इल्ला दुआ फ़इन्नका फ़आलुल लिमा तशा या मन इस्मुहु दवा व ज़िक्रुहु शिफ़ा व ताअतुहु गिना इज़ा मन रअसु मालिहिर रजा व सिलाहुल बुक़ा या साबिग़न नियम या दाफ़िअन निकम या नूरल मुस्तवहिशीन फ़िज़्ज़ुलम या लिमन ला युअल्लम सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद वफ़ल बीमा अंता अहलु व सल्लल्लाहु अला रसूलिही वल आइमतिल मयामीन मिन आलिहि व सल्लम तस्लीमन कसीरा अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद अल्लाहुम्मा तख़िल अला अहलिल क़ुबूर सरूर अल्लाहुम्मा अग़नि कुल्ला फ़क़ीर अल्लाहुम्मा अशफ़ि कुल्ला जाय अल्लाहुम्मा अक़्सि कुल्ला उरियान अल्लाहुम्मा अक़्ज़िना कुल्ली मदीन अल्लाहुम्मा फ़र्रिज अन कुल्ली मकरूब अल्लाहुम्मा रुद्दा कुल्ला गरीब अल्लाहुम्मा फ़ुक्का कुल्ला असीर अल्लाहुम्मा अस्लिह कुल्ला फ़ासिद मिन उमूरिल मुस्लिमीन अल्लाहुम्मा अशफ़ि कुल्ला मरीज़ अल्लाहुम्मा सुद्दा फ़क़रना बिग़नाक अल्लाहुम्मा गय्यिर सूअ हालिना बिहुस्नि हालिक अल्लाहुम्मा अक़्ज़िना अद-दैन वग़्ना मिनल फ़क़्र इन्नका अला कुल्लि शैइन क़दीर अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद।
My elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum. Just have a few announcements for this coming week. Beginning with tomorrow, Friday, October 11th, we'll have Salatul Jum'ah with Sheikh Bilal, starting with Dua Nudba, of course, at 12:15. On Saturday, October 12th, you will notice on our schedule we have the Muslim Fall Festival. Alhamdulillah, it is a matter of great honor for us that the Nassau County Police Department has awarded us what is called the Blue and Faith Day, or the Faith and Blue Day. What it is, it's a program that started by the Department of Justice 4 to 5 years ago. And every year, they award one faith institution with this honor, where the Nassau County Police Department comes with all of their latest equipment and they showcase it. And really, the primary winners here are the children, because they actually engage the children. So you'll see male police officers, women police officers coming and engaging our youngsters, our youth. In addition to, of course, parading their latest equipment, they'll have the latest gadgets, i.e. robots. They'll have their canine team, they'll have their horse team that comes over, the motorcycles and everything. And so our children will actually be able to engage them, learn more about careers in police enforcement or law enforcement. It is really a once-in-a-lifetime sort of event. And every institution that gets this honor gets to celebrate that, and they are able to then invite other Muslim organizations, which is what we have done as well. So we will have members of other Muslim organizations coming and participating, and this is just at the right time, because guess what it is on Sunday? It is the Khushali of Imam Hassan al-Askari. And if all of you know, and Malim tells us all the time, what Askari stands for. Askari stands for the fact that Imam Hassan al-Askari was in a town which was a military garrison in Samar. Right? So the timing of it couldn't be more right. So we'll also be celebrating the Khushali of Imam Hassan al-Askari on that particular day. The event will begin at 10 a.m. We'll have the police force show up. They'll be coming early to set up everything. The actual event will start off at 10 and conclude at 12:30 with Namaz Jamaat, which Malim will be there to recite Namaz Jamaat. We will also have the commissioner himself visiting, and who has been an absolutely great support of our center. If you all recall, every single time we need police security, whether it is during our ladies programs, whether it is during madrasa, whether it is during nights of Wafat or Khushali, they are there. One phone call and they are there for us. And if you remember, months of Ramadan and months of Muharram, they are here. So this is one of those opportunities we have to build that relationship, to solidify the relationship, because that's where we live, and this is something that we must do. And inshallah, Malim will also be addressing us on that particular day with the police presence there, so that they get to understand the Islamic view of living and coexisting with law enforcement, and what is our responsibility when it comes to living in this area with our police presence. So it's very, very important, and I'm really requesting, this is a great honor for us. Not every institution gets this. There will also be a helicopter flyover. It will come at a specific time during the event, and it will actually come right on top of our center. So they are also, of course, investing in this, and so this is an opportunity for all our community members to show up on this day with our children. I've also asked Uncle Inaya to make sure the elderly team, or the elderly group that they have, to also show up both on the ladies and gents side. And we have all our volunteers engaged. This event has taken us 2 to 3 weeks in planning. We've been meeting literally every other night, making sure that every item is covered to its depth. We also will have vendors of our community serving food, so we also have to support them. So this whole facility will become a very festive environment to celebrate the Khushali of Imam Hassan al-Askari. For the children, we have arranged for bouncy, we have arranged for an ice cream truck to come and serve them ice cream, free ice cream. We want the children to have a fantastic time. Sporting teams of our community are coming over to also engage the children during this time. So after Namaz Jamaat, it'll be all for the children. The bouncy, there's cartoon characters coming, there'll be hand painting and what have you, all for the children. So please make sure you bring your children. This is also for them. So this is all happening on Saturday beginning at 10 a.m. On Sunday, we'll have our madrasa, begins at 10:45 a.m. up to 2:30 p.m. And of course, on Sunday evening, beginning at 6:50 p.m., we will have our wiladat of Imam Hassan al-Askari, beginning with Salat, Surah Yasin, Hadith Kisa, and of course, Majlis by Sheikh Bilal Hussein, Qasida and Ziyarat. Let me conclude now. Of course, as you know, there are many in our community members who are in need of our shafa. Please do not forget Mustafa Shivji. Unfortunately, he had a little bit of a setback, but you also know that his son is getting married in Toronto this coming Saturday, Anwar, and it is really unfortunate that there's a strong chance he may not make his son's wedding. So he needs all our prayers at this particular time. May I ask all of you to remember him and all those who are sick here and all over the world with Dua Shafa. Please join me. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. And let's also remember all the marhum marhumin. Please also take your thoughts to the Middle East, what's happening in all parts of our Muslimin world, all those people who are suffering, all those martyrs, and of course let's remember the orphans and the widows with Surah Al-Fatiha, especially for the marhumin and the martyrs. Al-Fatiha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh Bilal, tafadhal. Per Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, salawat.
رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم والرحمة، أولئك هم المهتدون. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And you're allowed a salawat for ta'jeel faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Briefly, in our discussion around fiqh, we had been mentioning the rulings and discussion around the association of orphans and the concept of adopting an orphan. And we mentioned last week that, or in our last discussion, that the adoption of an orphan does not create mahramiyat. And this was indicated in the Holy Quran, that, for example, if you adopt a child, they don't become your mahram. They can't, for example, look at the women, or the other way, vice versa, without the presence of hijab. And that this being one of the ahkam associated with this responsibility, another point to note is that they don't naturally inherit from the people who adopt them. So, for example, rights of inheritance are established through blood relations and relationships of the womb. In the absence of a relationship of the womb, even if I adopt a child, naturally the law of Islam does not give that child a share of inheritance from me. Now, within the system of wasiyah, there is a discretionary portion of 30% that every person has. And this is one of the mercies of Allah, because on its fundamental, when a person dies, they no longer own anything. You don't own anything. So meaning you technically have no right over that possession once you've passed away. So hence Allah affixes the affairs and leaves this to the rest of the inheritors based upon Allah's discretion and what Allah has established as command. But part of His mercy is that Allah allows that the deceased has discretion over 30% of whatever it is they leave. This 30% that you have discretion over, that I can choose that whatever money I have left or that whatever possessions I had in my life, that now that my life is over, I have discretion over this, what I want to do with it. I can, for example, do it in Shab-e-Jum'ah, do a good deed with this. I can, for example, if I feel that my daughters are only receiving half the share of the boys, I can use my 30% to increase the share that my daughters receive. Or if I have an orphan that I've raised, I can give a share of inheritance to that orphan that I've adopted through the process of using this 30% that I own. But to naturally say that every single one has an equal share and that this is how it should be distributed is not according to the ahkam of Islam and is not permissible by that process. Now in these 2 weeks we've mentioned two of the important issues that are associated with the process of taking care of or adopting a child or an orphan into our household. And we see that both of them are complications, they're both difficulties. However, whether we look at it from the position of hijab or we look at it from the position of inheritance, it still is something that is promoted within the religion of Islam to take in and to take care of orphans, regardless of these difficulties. Look, for example, the example of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to show the desirability of this action. We see that our Prophet himself took in an orphan by the name of Zayd ibn Haritha. Zayd ibn Haritha, for example, when he was brought into the house of the Prophet, he was given as a gift, as a servant by Sayyidah Khadija. And then he became the son of the Prophet through the nature of how the Prophet kept him in his house, to the extent where when his relatives learned that this Zayd had been sold into slavery and had been come to the city of Mecca, they came to collect him. His father Harith came to get him. And Zayd preferred to stay in the company of the Holy Prophet than to go home with his father, because of the qaraba and the relationship that had been established. Eventually, because of this, people began to refer to him as Zayd Muhammadi, Zayd ibn Muhammad. And then Allah corrected this by saying that no, he has to retain the name of his father, and it's not appropriate to take the name of, for example, the Prophet, even though the Prophet is the one who is raising him. This establishment and continuing relationship, which is why till today we refer to him Zayd ibn Harith, who was raised in the house of the Prophet, shows the desirability of this action. And that it's not something that we should avoid, but rather the taking care of orphans is something emphasized repeatedly. The ideal situation, which is what Islam promotes, is that the relatives takes responsibility for an orphan in the family. And this way that, for example, the relationships of mahramiyat are established. But the taking care of an orphan from whatever means possible, whether it is by adopting that child or whether it is by sending support of that child, is one of the most important mustahab actions that we have, and it follows the relationship of our Prophet, as well as looking at the status of the Anbiya and khususan our Prophet, who was also an orphan in his time. This caring for orphans is something that Allah wants us to do, not shy away from. Hence the specificity. This is why the specification of how to do it correctly and why these ahkam are laid out so clearly. Inshallah, next week we'll mention a few more conditions on this, and we'll continue our discussion of fiqh from there. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the interesting discussions on the topic of patience that comes about is that patience is not a uniform discussion, but rather it has within it sections, and that there are types of patience. This discussion around the types of patience, maybe we've introduced it before, but in elaboration this week, talks about a hadith that Ibn Abi Hadid al-Mu'tazili writes in Sharh Nahj al-Balagha, pointing to a tradition of our master Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa as-sabru ala thalathatu aqsam. That patience is of three types. As-sabru ala ta'a, as-sabru ala al-ma'siyah, wa as-sabru ala al-bala'i wal-masa'ib. Wa a'adhamuhum as-sabru ala al-ma'siyah. Amir al-Mu'mineen gives the explanation. He says patience is of three types. There is patience on that which is being one who submits and performs ita'at of Allah and submits to the commands of Allah. There is patience for the one who avoids the sin against the command of Allah, and there is the patience of the one who goes through difficulty and hardship in their life. Amir al-Mu'mineen goes further, other than just elaborating these three types. He goes through and he says, and the greatest patience of these three is the one who is patient in the condition of not sinning against Allah. To understand these three, there is some description where we need to pay attention to, or some examples that we can take a look at to try and understand what does it mean when Imam Ali elaborates and he says patience is of three types. The first of these, when Amir al-Mu'mineen explains and he points to and says that there is patience in submitting to the command of Allah, and ta'atillah, and obeying Allah requires patience. There are a number of examples that we can take a look at, but one that we look at briefly is the idea that, for example, and this is a practical one, you go to Mecca, you stay in a hotel, you go for Umrah, the hotel offers you a buffet. In this buffet there's all types of food, and there's some fish in this buffet. Now you look at the fish, and it's just a fillet of fish, you can't really tell, but a fillet like this can come from a number of different types of fish. And one of the places where it often comes from, because it's imported in the Middle East from Thailand, is catfish. Now looking at that fish, you can't tell where it came from. If you were to pick up that fish and just simply say, oh, Yad al-Muslim, it's a Muslim country, it's a Muslim market, it's halal, I can eat it. This is a misinterpretation of the rule first and foremost. When we say Yad al-Muslim or Suq al-Muslim, and this is a proof on something, this is proof on that animal being mudhakka, not on the act of it being permissible to eat. Let me explain. If I go to the house of a Muslim, or I go to a Muslim country, and someone offers me a burger, a hamburger, if you're hungry, I apologize, offers me a burger, I sit there and I look at it and say, is this burger, I know it's beef, but is it halal, is it not halal, was it slaughtered correctly, was it not slaughtered correctly? This issue is resolved by Yad al-Muslim. The rule in Islam is that if a Muslim who is a practicing or a known Muslim offers you something, or you are in a Muslim country and the marketplaces of Muslimin, I can buy from that without having to ask them the question that, who slaughtered this, how was it slaughtered? The rule goes so far as to say that if, for example, I go to the house of a mu'min, someone who I know is a believer, who does everything that they're supposed to and is part of my community, and I sit in their house and they put food in front of me, and I turn to them and I say, which store did you buy this from? Which provider did you buy this from? That this action is actually ihanatil mu'min, it's disrespect of a mu'min, and it's a sin. I'm not allowed to do that. But this qa'idatil yad al-Muslim, when I'm sitting in that buffet in a Muslim country, doesn't apply to the fish. Because the question of the fish is not whether it was mudhakka or not. That's a question I have to ask later. The first question is this a permissible type of fish to eat? Qa'idatil yad, the rule of someone's hand, and that yad al-Muslim or suq al-Muslimin doesn't apply yet. It's my obligation to first determine, is this something that is a permissible fish to eat? And once I come to that conclusion, then the next question is that, okay, fine, this fish, let's say it came from salmon. This fish that's in front of me, was it slaughtered correctly, or is it mudhakka, meaning that was it taken out of the water alive, or was it captured alive? That I don't have to question and say, who caught this fish and how did it happen? There, the market of the Muslimin, that for a Muslim to eat something that is dead already or carry it in the water is impermissible, is something that's understood. I don't have to worry about that. But this rule of applying and first coming to the determination is very easy to say that yes, you need to make sure that this fish is halal, or that this fish is from a permissible fish to eat. But in the reality, when we see, for example, someone who is in that situation and they're looking at the buffet and they're like, it's all part of the buffet. That's where the point comes in of patience in submitting to the command of Allah and following the command. There's a very famous story about how far we can actually take this in terms of wanting to truly submit to the command of Allah, in a story that comes from Sheikh Murtaza Ansari. Sheikh Murtaza, one of the great teachers of the Hawza, his books are still taught, studied today, and his piety is something that is without many examples, which is why we refer back to examples from his life of his piety. In one of the stories about the life of Sheikh Murtaza, it's mentioned to say that in those days people were very poor. And Sheikh Murtaza, on the weekends, when he was done studying, would go with his friends and leave the city of Najaf and go out to Kufa, for example, Shatt al-Furat, go out to the riverside of Furat, or go to visit places. And him and his friend decided the next day that they would go on a trip on their weekend off and go out of the city. And the night before they're supposed to leave, the two of them plan and they say, Sheikh Al-Ansari says, I have no money. Do you have any money? What are we going to eat? And his friend says, I have 2 coins. We can purchase 2 pieces of bread with these coins. That'll be enough for us. Sheikh Ansari says, hi, here. Then we're set. We have food for tomorrow too. And the two of them, they head out the next morning. He asks his friend, did you bring the food? And he says, I brought the food. And they go. When they get to where they're going, time for food comes. Sheikh Murtaza says, okay, bring the bread. His friend takes the bread out very happily, very proud, and he puts a piece of bread in front of him, and he puts a piece of bread in front of himself, and then he puts sweet on top of the bread, halwa, on top of his bread, and on top of his own bread. Sheikh Al-Ansari says, you told me you had 2 coins, where did you get halwa? Where did you get sweet from to eat with this bread? And his friend says, relax, don't worry about it. He says, no, what do you mean don't worry about it? You told me 2 coins, you can't buy halwa and bread with 2 coins. He says, well, when I was leaving the city after I brought the bread, I saw one of those street vendors and he was coming out with a fresh tray of halwa. So what I did was I bought it on loan. I said, give it to me today and I'll pay you later. And I brought the sweet. Eat. Sheikh Al-Ansari pauses for a second. He says, you didn't think this through. He says, what do you mean I didn't think it through? I'll pay the loan, it's not a big deal, eat. He says, what if you die before you can repay the loan? He says, then Sheikh Ansari, you were alive, you pay it for me. Sheikh Al-Ansari says, what if I die? He says, then I'll pay it for you. He says, what if we both die? And he says, okay, now Sheikh Al-Ansari, you're going a little crazy. What are the chances of both of us dying before we can pay this loan? Come on, be realistic. Sheikh Al-Ansari says, but what if the person who you bought it from, he dies? And the man says, listen, Sheikh, it's not that big of a deal, let's just eat. Sheikh Al-Ansari says, no, I don't want to take that risk that I consume something that could become impermissible because I don't have the ability to pay for it before I leave. Sheikh Al-Ansari in the situation, famously the story says, Sheikh Al-Ansari, not only did he not eat the halwa that was there, but even the bread that was under the halwa that had soaked in some of the sweetness of the halwa, he refused to eat. And he only ate the sides of the bread. And he left the rest and he says, I don't want to consume that which would even be this much of a risk for my faith. Famously, when they wrote the story, they wrote and said that a few days when they went back, his friend comes to him and he says, Sheikh Ansari, help me. Sheikh Ansari says, why? Why do you need help for? He says, well, I went to that street vendor to pay him, but he had died. And now I can't find his relatives. And Sheikh Al-Ansari says, see, this is why you take caution where you can. It's a famous story. There's a hal to this as well too, that there's Radd Madalim, there's also the inheritors and finding the family and all these affairs that can take place to repay a loan. But simply a person passing away does not remove the obligation of paying such a loan. So hence this is the concept of being patient even in ta'at, even in obedience to Allah. There is such a level of patience and such a level of discretion to be careful. The second of these categories, without going too long into it, talks about the attribute of a person who is patient in the face of the ability to sin and has the sin in front of him but chooses to avoid that sin in the idea of the worship of Allah. And Amir al-Mu'mineen elaborates that this is the greatest type of patience. The discussion of why this would be the greatest type of patience, or why this would be a'lamu, the most highest of the types, is a really interesting discussion that many different ulama have brought different perspective on. Some of this perspective presents on the idea that this is a man who has an ability, or a person who has the ability, has the resources, and has the enemy in front of him promoting him to a negative capacity. And he stands in the face of both his nafs and of the shaitan, and comes to the conclusion in the ibadat of Allah and avoids that aspect that would otherwise be an appeal to himself. There's a discussion that talks about and says that this is, for example, one of the most difficult tests that can happen upon a person, that they are the ones who are tempted by shaitan in this way. And there are many stories that talk about this, including, for example, the description that says that a student who was staying in the dorms one night, in the middle of the night during a storm, a knock comes to his door, and a young woman comes to his door and says that I have nowhere to go, please give me sanctuary. The young man says, there's only one bed in this place and it's only for me, get out. And she says, where am I to go? I'm a lone young girl and I'm in this situation, please help me. I've come to a place where I expected goodness from. And the man says, okay. He gives her the place to sleep, but he stays awake himself and he stays busy at his desk the entire night. The next morning when the girl wakes up, she finds that the young man is still sitting at his desk, but all of his fingers are bandaged now. She says, Bashir, what happened? He says, it's nothing to do with you, get out. And he kicks her out. When she returns, it happens to be that she was from the family of royalty at that point in time, and she returns to her father, and the father questions, what happened to you? Where did you go? She says, I came to a place, I found myself in difficulty, I found sanctuary in the house of a student, and the student assisted me, and I wanted to do something kind for him, and I saw the student's hands were burned, I don't know why. So the father from the royalty uses his leverage and calls this young man and offers him a reward, but he says, first explain to me what happened to you. Why did this happen? He says, I don't want to talk about it. He says, no, I insist you tell me. And he explains, he says that I found myself in a difficult situation where many people have fallen astray. And to protect myself, I sat by the candle, and whenever shaitan would disturb me, I would bring my finger to the candle and remember that if I can't bear this, then how could I bear the punishment of Allah? And he says, through the night, I would remind myself of the punishment of Allah. I would keep myself awake and away so that I would protect my faith. Understanding the piety of this young man, he was given great reward and eventually married to the girl and had a great status and position that he attained through his actions of piety. The reward of humanity in the face of not violating the rules of Allah is only a small piece of the great reward that a person can attain by submitting to the will of Allah and the command of Allah, which is why the verse that we began our discussion with is the verse in which in Surah Baqarah Allah describes the status of those who are patient with Allah. Famously in the verses, وَإِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا فَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَّبِّهِمْ وَالرَّحْمَةُ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. This verse describes the status of the patient in the eyes of Allah. أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَّبِّهِمْ. Upon them is salawat from their Lord, وَالرَّحْمَةُ, and mercy from Allah. Think of the status that Allah gives to one who is patient. That we look and we say that Allah is the one who is saying, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَّبِّهِمْ. This attribute of salawatun alayhim min rabbihim is the attribute that we dedicate and allocate to those who are Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. If you think of this attribute, it's a description of saying that Allah gives you that position that's upon you is Allah's salawat. This salawat is something Allah has dedicated for those special pious people. As a matter of fact, this verse in particular is one of the explanations of why we know that difficulty befalls the pious more than anyone else. Why? Because Allah is describing the extremely high status, that those who are patient, they have salawat and blessings from Allah upon them, they have the mercy of Allah upon them. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. That they are those people who are the ones that are righteously guided by Allah and they are on the path of hidayah. This explanation should be something that gives us confidence and comfort that patience is the requirement, and through difficulty, through challenges, is always going to be the attribute of the pious people, not of the impious people. Meaning that don't imagine that difficulty befalls everyone equally. No, the greater the status in the eyes of Allah, the more the difficulty that befalls you. Which is why Allah describes and elaborates this sabr as three types, and that third type being sabr and patience in the face of difficulty and masa'ib and problems that befall us in our life. And that this attribute, that accomplishing patience through these levels, is something that Allah wants to reward, is what is matlub from all of us. Which is why we see another statement from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That reality and what Allah has commanded will befall you. If you are patient through it, you will be rewarded. But reality and what Allah has commanded will befall you. If you sin through it, or if you violate and lose your patience, then you will be one who is punished for these actions. Meaning that Allah has made a dictate already that reality as it exists is something that will befall each of us. And that there is good in that and there is difficulty within that. But the consequence of reward and punishment is something that is at the discretion of humanity, is at the discretion of man. And Allah, to promote us through the act of patience, is the one who takes the time to elaborate, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَّبِّهِمْ. Such an azim status that Allah describes, that upon them is salawat from Allah, upon them is blessings from Allah, in such a level that it should be something that as we send blessings on others, to understand that we should have the desire for those blessings as well. This is why the door of patience and the discussion of patience is a very important one and a very lengthy one, and which is why when we see the awliya of Allah, the beloved of Allah, go through difficulties, it is to establish the character of patience within us and to teach us examples of how it is that patience should be expressed in these difficulties. This is why when we see that, for example, the ma'soom is not just the one who is ma'soom ala al-ismatil kubra, that which whose infallibility is mandated for the religion of Islam to be true, but that rather each of those pious people that we talk about is one of those who avoided the act of sinning and was the one who submitted to the command of Allah. And amongst the greatest of these examples is the mountain of patience, Sayyidah Zainab, who through her character we saw her go through difficulties unlike anyone else. And though she did not possess ismat the way the Imams did, her example was a perfect example that Allah laid out for humanity to be able to follow and understand, that do not be overcome and do not avoid that which Allah has commanded to befall you, and perform those actions in a beautiful way. We see that our fourth Imam would describe and say that my mother, Sayyidah Zainab, was the one who never in the worship of Allah neglected Salatul Layl, except that on the night of Ashura she prayed her Salatul Layl sitting instead of standing because of the severity of the difficulty. That her example in the perfection of worshipping Allah, her example in perfection in avoiding of sinning, that would not maybe even have been considered a sin, that should she have been upset and cursed at or abused those who put difficulty upon her and killed her children and her family, yet her example was perfect, that in there was nothing that could be criticized as a reaction of emotion or against the will of Allah. And her example in being patient in bearing the difficulties that she bore and the masa'ib that she bore is why we call her the mountain of patience. And we have these examples for us to learn from of how to implicate patience within our life. We ask Allah by the right of this day, by the right of the Hadireen, Ghaibeen, that, oh Allah, first and foremost, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, we ask by the right of this majlis and those who are present that, oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumeen, the marhumeen of tonight's sponsors, and all those who are in need of dua. Ya Allah, by the right of this Thursday night, the Quran and the example of Ahlul Bayt, we have come here with hajat. By the right of this night, by the right of the Ahlul Bayt, fulfill our hajat. Oh Allah, those amongst our families, our communities, the mu'mineen who are suffering through sickness and disease, give shafa'ah to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Ya Allah, those who are suffering through insecurity and difficulty wherever they may be, oh Allah, give aman to the mu'mineen and muslimeen wherever they are. Oh Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman, and entitle us to the ziyarat of Aba Abdullah in this world and the shafa of Aba Abdullah in the hereafter. 1 Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas, لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا احد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله احد الله الصمد.
Ziyarat. Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah, Assalamu alaikum ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Assalamu alaikum ya Fatima al-Zahra, Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alameen, Assalamu alaikum ya Hassan al-Muttaba, Assalamu alaikum ya Aba Abdullah, Assalamu alaikum ya Warisa Adam Sifwatillah, Assalamu alaikum ya Warisa Nuhin Nabiyillah, Assalamu alaikum ya Warisa Ibrahim Khalilillah, Assalamu alaikum ya Warisa Musa Kalimillah, Assalamu alaikum ya warisa Isa Ruhillah, Assalamu alaikum ya warisa Muhammadin Habibillah, Assalamu alaikum ya warisa Ali Amir Mu'mineen Waliyin alayhi salam, Assalamu alaikum ya ibn Muhammad al-Mustafa, Assalamu alaikum ya ibn Anil Murtaza, Assalamu alaikum ya Fatima al-Zahra, Assalamu alaikum ya ibn Hadijat al-Kubra, السلام عليك يا سار الله وابن ساري والبتر الموتور أشهد أنك أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سميت بذلك فرزيت بي يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة لم تنجزك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تبسك من متلهمات ثيابها وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الحادي المهدي وأشهد أنك أئمة من ودك كلمة التقوى وعلام الهدى والأروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياء ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبيع بكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم زيادة الأكبر. السلام عليكم من رسول الله السلام عليكم من نبي الله السلام عليكم من أمير المؤمنين السلام عليكم من الحسين الشهيد السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سميت بذلك فرزيت به زيادة شهداء كربلاء. السلام عليك يا أولياء الله وأحباء السلام عليك يا أصفياء الله وبداء السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي والزكي الناصر السلام عليك يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنت وأمي تبتم وتابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم زيارة حضرت عباس. السلام عليك يا أبو الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين السلام عليكم يا سيد الوسيين السلام عليك يا أول القوم الإسلام واخدم إيمانا وأخوم بدين الله وأختم على الإسلام أشهد أنك قد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم له المعاصي فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتقت الحرمة الإسلام فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر وله دافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة الرب الراغب فيما زهد فيه خيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل والحقق الله بدرجتك عبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليكم جميعا رحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء وفقنا الله زيارتك يا مولا ورزق الله شفاعتك في الدنيا والآخرة. السلام عليك الأخت فاطمة المعصومة ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان السلام عليك يا إمام سوى الجان السلام عليكم جميعا رحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك توأ وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.